Today I'm going to be working on my recently completed workbook called Joseph from Commander to Son. And this finishes up the book of Genesis, Genesis chapters 42 through 50. And so since we're starting it, I wanted to quickly show you some of the starting pages. We will be referring to this occasionally. This shows which mother each of the sons come from. And then, of course, since we're still concentrating on Joseph, we have this graph again too, which will help us a lot of times knowing where um, everything happens. And you see that little phrase there on the bottom there, or in the middle, lower middle. This book starts right there before the whole family comes to get grain, just when the brothers first come to Egypt to get grain. And so we are going to be doing chapter 1. Joseph's 10 brothers traveled to Egypt. And this will be Genesis 42, 1 through 17. Genesis 42, 1. When Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you keep looking at each other?" He continued, "I have heard that there's grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us, so that we may live and not die." Now, why were the brothers looking at each other? Possibly because it's Egypt, and that's where Joseph was brought to be sold. And so they're going, okay, we don't necessarily want to go to Egypt. Don't know if Joseph's there or dead or whatever. And but his father, their father, who doesn't know what happened to Joseph, they're going, why are you guys standing around here? We need grain. Egypt has grain. Go get grain. So looking at the scripture below, why was the fact that there was grain in Egypt so important? So Genesis 41, 53, 57. The 7 years of abundance in Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine had begun, just as Joseph had said. There was famine in all the other lands, but in the whole land of Egypt there was food. When all Egypt began to feel the famine, the people cried to Pharaoh for food. Pharaoh told all the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph and do what he tells you." When the famine had spread over the whole country, Joseph opened the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe throughout Egypt. And all the world came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph because the famine was severe everywhere. So, why was it so important that grain was in Egypt? Because there's a famine that's affecting the whole land. Hmm. Two, instead of already heading to Egypt, the brothers keep looking at each other. This was done so much that their father noticed. Look at Genesis 37 below. Why may they not want to go to Egypt? Genesis 37, 23 to 28. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the ornate robe he was wearing, and they took him and threw him into the cistern. The cistern was empty, there was no water in it. And as they sat down to eat their meal, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were loaded with spices, balm, and myrrh, and they were on their way to take them to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, "What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." His brothers agreed, so when the Mennonite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites who took him to Egypt. So that's the why they may not want to go to Egypt, is they don't know what happened to Joseph. They may end up finding him there. What does Jacob ask his sons to do? Go to Egypt, get some food. We're hungry. So in Genesis 42, 3, the 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain from Egypt. But Jacob did not send Benjamin, Joseph's brother, with the others, because he was afraid that harm might come to him. So Israel's sons were among those who went to buy grain, for there was famine in the land of Canaan also. The distance from Hebron to Egypt is about 250 to 300 miles, depending on where you're starting and stopping. and would have taken about 20 to 30 days one way by donkey, which is what they're traveling with. 10 of Joseph's brothers are going to Egypt. Jacob had 12 sons. What two sons are not going to Egypt and why? Benjamin, who is staying with Jacob, and Benjamin is not young, and Joseph, who's already in Egypt. Looking at the family tree on page 3, who's both Benjamin and Joseph's mother? Now, you may know this already without looking, but Benjamin and Joseph's mother is Rachel, which is the reason why Jacob doesn't want Benjamin to go. He's the only son left he has of his most favored wife. Rachel had died right after Benjamin was born in Genesis 35, 16 through 19. Here's a good moment to figure out the ages of all the people involved here, so we can now see just how old everybody is. In order for the story to fit the timeline, it had to be the first year of famine. And it will rule out that that is, in fact, the case. Knowing that, we can figure everyone's age. Joseph is 37. Since Jacob was 91 when Joseph was born, he is now 128. Rachel died giving birth to Benjamin. It also appears that Leah, Bilhah, and Zilpah are no longer living. The sons in order of age are Reuben, 44, Simeon, 43, Levi, 42, Judah, 41, Dan, 40, Naphtali, 39, Gad, 39, Asher, 38, Issachar, 38, Zebulun, 37, Dinah, the daughter, 37, Joseph, 37, and Benjamin, 21. You remember, the reason why some have are about the same age is because there were 4 wives having children. Okay, and here on the map you can see the route they're taking to Egypt. Now Joseph was the governor of the land of Egypt, the person who sold grain to all its people. So when Joseph's brothers arrived, they bowed down to him with their faces to the ground. Why was Joseph the person who sold grain to all the people rather than a subordinate of Joseph? Remember again that Joseph was put in charge of all the food preparation, saving, and now the food selling of Egypt. In this case, the brothers bowed down not for worship, but due to respect. Why would the 10 brothers show honor and respect to an Egyptian? Because this is the person that's going to give them food, grain rather, and so they needed to make sure that he liked them as much as they can. Joseph was 17 years of age when he was sold into slavery. He is now 37 years of age. How do you think Joseph feels to see the brothers who sold him to be now bound down to him? I would say he is amazed, angry, shocked. A number of emotions are mixed up all together. Number 4, Joseph literally has the success or failure of his brothers in his hands. He would have readily noticed that both his father and his youngest brother are not with the group. How do you think he will obtain information about his father and brother while he decides what he's going to do to his brothers? There has to be. He is going to want to find information about Jacob and Benjamin, but he doesn't want it to look like he's trying to understand what their family rights are. So maybe, how many are at home that you need food for, or any of these questions he might be asking. As soon as Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he pretended to be a stranger and spoke harshly to them. "Where do you come from?" he asked. "From the land of Canaan," they replied, "to buy food." Technically, he would not have spoken directly to them, but through an interpreter, as an Egyptian would not normally be able, nor care, even, to speak Hebrew. Did Joseph recognize his brothers right away? Yes, indeed he did. Why would the brothers not recognize Joseph? Well, there's several reasons. Let's see which ones might apply. Egyptians wear makeup both for sun protection and protect from evil spirits. That is true. Egyptians dress differently from Hebrews. That is also true. Egyptians speak a different language than the Hebrews. That is true. The brothers would certainly not expect Joseph to be an Egyptian official. That is definitely true. Joseph certainly didn't let him know who he was. And F is the only one that probably isn't true. The 10 brothers forgot their brother was probably in Egypt. That's probably not true, definitely by the story and what we read and how guilty they feel about Joseph. Number 3, Joseph had many ways to respond to his brothers. Why do you think he decided to speak harshly through his interpreter and not tell him who he was? I think he's reacting the same way any Egyptian would react to any foreigner, and making it harsh and tough, because the food was originally just for the Egyptians, not for outsiders as well. So he's probably being what would normally be for that position to outsiders. Since he was speaking actually through an interpreter, did his brothers know that Joseph understood what they said? Probably not. Probably not. Genesis 42:8. Although Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. Then he remembered his dreams about them and said to them, "You are spies. You have come to see where our land is unprotected." "No, my lord," they answered. "Your servants have come to buy food. We are all sons of one man. Your servants are honest men, not spies." Even though it happened over 20 years earlier, Joseph remembers the dream shown in Genesis 37 below. What just happened in Genesis 42:6 that reminded him of these dreams? Okay, so Genesis 37, 5 through 7 and 9. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. We are binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. "Listen," he said, "I had another dream, and this time the sun, moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me." So the comparison here is they're now bowing down to him as in his dream. And interestingly, it actually talks about grain, which is the whole problem that they had. Instead of being friendly, what does Joseph accuse his brothers of? Being spies. That accusation actually would not have been abnormal. It's very probable that any Egyptian in this position would have thought the same. Joseph, however, knew better, but he wasn't going to make himself known about yet. Basically, they are foreigners, and they are muscular, and there's 10 of them all together. Egyptians don't take kindly to foreigners. And then, so you have that too. What 2 pieces of information do the 10 brothers give to Joseph? We are sons of one man, and that they are honest men, not spies. So the scripture continues, Genesis 42:12. "No," he said to them, "you have come to see where our land is unprotected." But they replied, "Your servants were 12 brothers, the sons of one man, who live in the land of Canaan. The youngest is now with our father, and one is no more." What did Joseph accuse his brothers of? That they were spies. Why is Joseph so harsh with his brothers? If we had not yet read about the many times that Joseph had been known for his positive nature in prior scriptures, we would assume that this was out of vengeance. But truly we will see that it's to find out if his brothers have changed since they sold him into slavery. Also, Joseph has no idea how his father and youngest brother are. He certainly doesn't want to reward them if Jacob and Benjamin have not fared well under the brothers' control. Why the idea of spies? 10 big, rugged men. Apparently, the muscle strength of the Israelites compared to the common Egyptians will be apparent again when 350 years later, the Pharaoh will fear the large amount of Israelite men will join with their enemies and defeat the Egyptians in Exodus. And you'll see a note here on Exodus 1, 8 through 10 below. Exodus 1, 8 through 10. "Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, 'Look, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and it happen in event of war that they also join our enemies and fight against us and so go up out of the land. In supporting their reason for coming to get the food to survive, they talk about their family. From this page and prior page, what all do they tell Joseph about their family? There was originally 12 brothers, and it's sons of one man who lives in Canaan. They come from Canaan. The youngest is still living with their father, and one is no more. Through this, Joseph learns a few things. Jacob, his father, is still alive, and Benjamin, his youngest brother, is also still alive, and they think Joseph is dead. Genesis 42:14. Genesis said to them, "It is just as I told you, you were spies, and this is how you'll be tested. As surely, as surely as Pharaoh lives, you will not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of your number to get your brother. The rest of you will be kept in prison, so that your words may be tested to see if you're telling the truth. If you are not, then as surely as Pharaoh lives, you are spies." And he put them all in custody for 3 days. So he puts them all in custody for 3 days, with the idea that one of them is going to have to go back and get his youngest brother, Benjamin. But he doesn't specify which one is going to go back. So I suppose this would be left to the brothers that are in prison as far as, or at least custody, as far as who's going to go back to try to bring Benjamin back to them. In order to prove that they are or are not spies, Joseph is going to do what to the 10 brothers? He's going to put them all in prison. In this test, he'll be accomplishing the following. A, they will not leave this place unless their youngest brother comes to Egypt. This will prove their statement they have a youngest brother. It also proved to Joseph that Benjamin is fine. One brother will be sent and the rest will be kept in prison until he returns with his younger brother. Is 250 to 300 miles away from Canaan to Egypt, so that the least amount of time this would take would be 40 to 60 days by donkey. They all were put in custody for 3 days before any brother was sent out, probably for the brothers to think about Joseph's terms. During the time in custody, they're going to have to decide which brother would be sent back to get Benjamin. Which brother do you think it will be? Well, it would have to be a brother that thinks that they can persuade Jacob to let go of Benjamin. And I don't know that any brother has that ability. The oldest would be the most logical, but the oldest has already knocked down a peg from what he did earlier. So I really don't know. We'll have to see. So that's the end of this chapter. And so we've come to the crossword. Okay, so number 4 across. What country has grain? That would be Egypt. Number 5 across. How many sons had Jacob? He had 12. Number 7 across. What is another name for the king of Egypt? Pharaoh. Number 8. What did Joseph accuse his brothers of being? Spies. 10. What was the problem Jacob's family faced? Famine. 1 down. Who was the governor of the land of Egypt? Joseph. Which brother did not go to Egypt but stayed with his father? Benjamin. 3. Who is the oldest brother of the 12? Reuben. The 10 brothers were put where for 3 days? Custody. And 9. What country did Jacob's family live in? Canaan. So that's the end of this chapter. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.